There's a plant that survives the drought that kills your lawn. It shrugs off the frost that flattens your flower beds in October. The beetles and aphids that devour everything else leave it almost untouched. And here's the part that makes no sense at first. In some neighborhoods, the people who run your homeowners association will send you a letter calling that exact plant a problem, a nuisance. In their words, sometimes invasive. So which is it? Is it the toughest, most reliable thing you could put in the ground? Or is it something to be torn out and replaced with grass that dies every August? Stay with me, because the answer is more interesting than either side wants to admit. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what is really going on in that letter. If you grow anything at all, or you have ever stood in your yard wondering why the lawn needs so much water, so much money, and so much of your weekend, this one is for you. Think for a moment about what an ordinary lawn actually demands. It wants water, often more water than any other single thing in the yard, poured onto it through the hottest, driest months precisely when water is most scarce. It wants mowing week after week through the whole growing season. It wants fertilizer to stay green, and then it wants weed killer and pest control to fix the problems the fertilizer helped create. And in spite of all of that effort, the moment a real drought arrives, or an early frost, or a bad year for insects, the lawn is usually the first thing in the yard to surrender. We have built our idea of a beautiful yard around one of the least resilient plantings a person can choose. Meanwhile, the toughest, most self-sufficient plants on the continent are sitting right there, often dismissed as weeds. Let us start with the plants themselves, because they are real, and the science behind them is not a secret. Across North America, there's a group of native perennials that botanists and university extension offices describe in almost the same words every time. Tough, low maintenance, drought tolerant, adapted over countless generations to exactly the conditions where you are standing. Take little bluestem, a native prairie grass that grows across much of the country. Researchers note that it evolved to withstand dry conditions over thousands of years on the open plains. Its roots can reach far below the surface, sometimes 6 to 15 feet down, where the groundwater still sits long after the topsoil has baked dry. That is the whole trick. While the shallow roots of ordinary turf grass have already given up and turned brown, the blue stem is still drinking from a reserve the lawn cannot reach. It stands tall in clay, in heat, in poor soil that would starve a more delicate plant. And in autumn it does something a lawn never will, turning the color of copper and bronze and holding that color through the cold. Take yarrow. Garden specialists describe its ability to thrive almost anywhere it sprouts, in soil so poor that pampered ornamentals would refuse to grow. They list pest resistance, erosion control, and the way it draws in the beneficial insects that quietly keep a garden in balance. Its leaves are fine and feathery, an adaptation that reduces how much water it loses to the air on a hot day. Take goldenrod. One horticultural guide notes plainly that it will grow without much effort just about anywhere, and that it does not suffer from many diseases or pest problems. It blooms late in the season, in gold exactly when most gardens have already faded, and it feeds the pollinators that are still working as the year winds down. There is even an old myth worth correcting here, because goldenrod gets blamed for hay fever every autumn. In truth, its pollen is too heavy to drift on the wind. The real culprit is ragweed, blooming at the same time, while the goldenrod takes the blame for simply being the one you can see. Notice the pattern. These are not exotic miracle plants smuggled in from somewhere far away. They are species that were already growing on this continent long before the first lawns were ever planted. They survived the droughts, the freezes, and the insects of this land for thousands of years, with no one watering them and no one spraying them. Before I go further, a quick word. If this kind of practical, grounded look at how things really work is what you came for, the subscribe button is right there, and it genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this one. Now back to the puzzle. If these plants are so resilient, why would anyone in charge of a neighborhood ever object to them? The honest answer has almost nothing to do with the plants being dangerous, and almost everything to do with how they look. A traditional homeowners association is built around a very particular idea of order. Short grass, straight edges, everything trimmed, uniform, and predictable. A native plant garden does not look like that. It can be tall. It can be loose and full of movement, swaying where a lawn would sit flat and still. In late summer, the goldenrod leans, the grasses go coppery, and the seed heads stand instead of being mowed flat. Now, those standing seed heads, by the way, are not neglect. They are food for birds through the winter, and shelter for the insects that pollinate next year's gardens. But to someone expecting a putting green, none of that registers. It simply reads as messy, as something that got away from its owner. And so the letters go out, and sometimes they use a word that does real damage to the conversation. That word is invasive. Here's where we need to be careful and precise, because this is the heart of the whole thing, and getting it wrong cuts both ways. There is a genuine category of plants that are invasive in the strict scientific sense, and the danger they pose is not exaggerated. Kudzu, the vine that swallows whole hillsides and abandoned barns across the American South. Running bamboo, which sends underground stems sideways for many feet and erupts in a neighbor's yard years later. Japanese knotweed, which can push up through asphalt and has been known to damage drainage and foundations. English ivy, which in many regions climbs and smothers native trees until they fall. These are species, most of them brought in from other parts of the world, that spread aggressively, crowd out the native plants that local wildlife depends on, and can be almost impossible to remove once they take hold. Pulling them out can take years. Some send up new shoots from the smallest fragment of root left in the ground. Those plants have earned the warning label completely. They cause real harm to ecosystems, to property, and to the gardeners who inherit a yard full of them. If you take one single thing from this video, let it be this. Never plant something simply because it is tough, without first checking whether it is genuinely invasive in your region. Toughness is not a virtue on its own. The very quality that makes a plant survive anything is the same quality that makes a truly invasive species impossible to stop. A truly invasive plant is not a rebellious choice or a clever shortcut. It is a burden you hand to every neighbor downwind, to the local woods and wetlands, and to every gardener who comes after you. But here is the sleight of hand that happens in a lot of those association letters. A well-behaved native goldenrod, or a clump forming native grass, is not invasive. It belongs here. It supports the local insects and birds that evolved alongside it. Yet the word invasive gets stretched and borrowed, used loosely to mean simply this does not look like a lawn. And that is a completely different claim. One is a statement about ecology that can be tested and proven in the field. The other is a statement about taste, dressed up in scientific language to sound official and beyond argument. Once you can hear the difference between those two meanings, you can read one of those letters and know exactly which one you're holding. And that single skill changes everything that comes next. So if the plant is not the real problem, what is? The real story is a quiet conflict that has been playing out across the country for years. And it is far more interesting than any conspiracy. There is no shadowy committee meeting in secret to keep these plants out of your yard. There is something much more ordinary, and in its own way, much more stubborn. A clash of two completely different ideas about what a yard is supposed to be. On one side, stand homeowners who want yards that use less water, cost less money, and support more wildlife. People who have looked at the weekly mowing and the water bill and the bags of chemicals and decided there has to be a better way. On the other side, stand association boards built to enforce a single uniform look, the manicured lawn that became the suburban default over the last century. For many of those boards, uniformity is not a preference. It is written into the founding documents as a duty, a promise that every yard will look more or less like every other yard. This is not a secret hidden by some shadowy authority. It is an open disagreement about what a yard is for, and it has spilled into courtrooms and statehouses again and again. Consider one case that made the news. A homeowner in Maryland planted a pollinator garden, the kind of habitat that feeds bees and butterflies and the songbirds that eat the insects it attracts. A neighbor disliked the look of it. The association fought so hard to force its removal that, by some accounts, they spent an enormous sum on legal fees, reportedly around $100,000, trying to make that homeowner tear it out and replace it with ordinary turf grass. Read that back slowly. A garden full of life, supporting the very pollinators that a large share of our food supply quietly depends on, treated as a violation to be crushed at almost any cost. That homeowner did not back down. She fought the case for years, eventually reached a settlement that let her keep her garden, and then went a step further. She contacted her state representative, and that effort helped turn into a law. That is the conflict in its purest form, and it shows how it can actually end. And here is the part that genuinely shifts the balance of power, the part most people in those neighborhoods do not know. The law has been moving steadily in favor of the gardener. A growing number of states have passed laws that limit what an association can do about native plants, water-wise landscaping, and what gets called low-impact landscaping. Reporting and legal summaries point to states including Texas, Maryland, Florida, Illinois, Maine, Colorado, and Nevada as having some of the clearest protections of this kind. In Maryland, the law that grew out of that very fight now requires associations to permit low-impact landscaping, a category that includes native plant gardens, rain gardens, and water-conserving designs, and it forbids them from demanding that your yard be turf grass. In Illinois, a Native Landscaping Act was signed that stops associations from simply banning native plants outright, as long as the area is kept free of weeds, genuine invasive species, and trash. In Texas, legislation passed that assures homeowners the right to install drought-resistant landscaping, though the association may still require a plan for approval first. In California, state law gives homeowners a powerful foundation to defend low-water landscaping choices, and an association that fights it unreasonably can even end up owing the homeowners legal fees. But, and this matters, none of these laws are a magic shield. Almost every one of them still lets the association set reasonable rules about how a yard looks: tidiness, height, maintenance. The protection is real, but it rewards the homeowner who does it thoughtfully, not the one who lets the yard go wild and calls it freedom. Which brings us to the practical heart of all this. If you want the resilient, low-water, wildlife-friendly yard, and you also do not want to fight with your neighbors or your board, the path is narrow, but it is well marked. It is not about defiance, and it is not about hoping nobody notices. It is about doing 4 things in the right order, and most of the homeowners who lose this fight lost it by skipping one of them. First, confirm that the plants you choose are genuinely native to your specific area, not merely tough and never actually invasive. Native to your state, ideally, not just native to the continent. A plant native to a prairie 2,000 miles away can still misbehave in your soil. Your state's Native Plant Society and your local agricultural extension office can tell you what truly belongs where you live, usually for free. Second, find out whether your state has one of these landscaping protection laws and read what it actually says. The protections vary widely, and a law in one state may not exist at all, one state line over. Some states have bills that have been introduced but never passed, so do not assume. Third, read your own association rules and architectural guidelines before you dig, because in most places, you still need to submit a plan for approval, and skipping that step is the single most common mistake people make. Even where the law is on your side, planting first and asking later hands the board an easy reason to come after you. Submit the plan, get it in writing, and you remove half the conflict before it starts. Fourth, design for the look as much as for the ecology. This is the step most people skip, and it is the one that wins: a defined border. A neatly mowed strip of grass along the edge, framing the wilder planting like a picture frame. Plants grouped in deliberate drifts rather than scattered at random. A small, tasteful sign explaining that this is a certified pollinator habitat or a native plant garden. Each of these turns what a skeptical neighbor might read as neglect into something that clearly reads as intentional, cared for, and chosen. The ecology underneath can be every bit as wild as you like. It is the visible edges that tell the story to everyone driving past. That combination, the right plants, the right legal footing, and a design that signals care is what separates the homeowner who wins this quietly and the one who ends up with a stack of fines and a yard full of regret. And that is exactly the gap I want to help you close. I have pulled all of this together into a companion guide, a practical reference that does the legwork so you do not have to spend your evenings cross-referencing plant lists and statutes. It walks through resilient native species organized by climate zone, so you can match plants to where you actually live rather than guessing from a generic list. For each one, it notes how the plant handles drought, frost, and pests, and just as importantly, it flags the genuinely invasive species to avoid, so you never make the mistake we talked about earlier in this video. It lays out, in plain language, how the landscaping protection laws work in the states that have them, what those laws do and do not cover, and how to find out about yours. And it gives you a step-by-step approach for working with your association rather than against it, including how to frame a planting plan that actually gets approved instead of fined. It is not a magic trick, and it is not a rebellion. It is the honest, grounded version of doing this right the first time. You will find the link in the description and in the pinned comment below. I built it to be the thing I wish I had handed myself years ago, before I learned all of this the slow way. Now, before you go, here's the simplest way to think about all of it. The plant in that association letter is almost never the real story. The real story is the difference between a plant that genuinely harms the land around it, which you should refuse to plant no matter how tough it is, and a plant that simply refuses to look like a lawn, which you may have every right to grow. One of those is a question of ecology, and it has a real answer that science can settle. The other is a question of taste, dressed up in scientific language to sound official and final when it is nothing of the kind. When you can hear which one a letter is really making, the whole thing loses its power to intimidate you. You stop arguing about whether your garden is allowed to exist and start a calmer, stronger conversation about how it should look, which is a conversation you can actually win. Learn to tell those two meanings apart, and you will never read one of those letters the same way again. If this gave you a clearer way of seeing your own yard, subscribe so the next one finds you, and I will see you in the next video.